committee, right? It's very important to see. Okay, thank you very much, recording. Okay, so I want to start my lecture using the slides, and I want to share the screen. Just wait. It's a two slides.
Oh, it's already. I think it's already. It was okay. I think it was okay.
It was okay.
Yeah,
I
it
just
was
wonder.
okay.
Just wait. One slide or two
Yeah,
slides?
this is one slide.
One slide?
Yes, one slide.
Okay. From now, I want to talk about the design thinking to recognize the world. It's a big issue, but my speaking is not so difficult, specialized topics. Then I wish you can have a kind of the interest about my lecture. And can you see the two pictures on the screen? The right side is, of course, as you know, it's the Earth, right? Do you know the right side picture? It's the oldest world map in the world. And this is two distinguished things is stimulate our interest because two pictures showed us the kind of our history of the visualization about the world. Okay, now let's take a look at the evolution of the world map. Then why now I show the world map? Because the desire to recognize the world and to have a bird's eye view of the world has been birth to the evolution of the humankind and awakened our sensibilities. How do you think? A world map can be said to be a visualization of the desire. In the Greek era, this map is made in the Greek era. We human beings once thought that the Earth was the center of the universe, with the sun and other planets and the constellations orbiting the Earth. Wait. Then the zodiac stars, including to the constellations, are attached to the outermost ceiling of the universe like a picture. It shows that we can only recognize the world by what we understand right now. At that era, the people thinks the universe, in this universe, the Earth was the center. And the second, even when we recognize the Earth was a sphere and orbiting the sun, go around the sun, we still thought that the sun was the center of the universe. Of course, today we clearly know that the sun is not the center of the universe. The solar system to which the Earth belongs is not only the center of the galaxy, but our Earth, where we live now, exists in the one corner of it. However, it was only a few decades ago in human history that we noticed this one. It's very amazing. Only because of the years we found this fact. Very long years we didn't know. And we human beings must always be the main characters in the history. We misunderstanding. Do you know this one? It's a very, very famous picture. Johannes Kepler was one of the very famous astronomer, and he believes that the distance between each planet in the solar system was consists with the regular polyhedron. We must always be the main characters in the history, right? That's why the Earth was a center. The Johannes Kepler, he discovered the structure of the solar system lies on the distance that the regular polyhedra join each other, like this. His findings were judged to be the inaccurate now, but his view of the universe and his attitude have significantly shifted the history of science since then. In other words, it is a strict fact that observing the universe requires mathematics, especially geometry. And do you know this picture? It's so beautiful picture. It's not a computer graphics, it's a real picture. Nowadays, we can fly out from the Earth by spacecraft and see the Earth from space like this. This is a picture of the universe. This is a picture of the Earth and the Moon taken together at the same moment when the Japanese spacecraft called Kaguya swinged by from the Earth, and is the furthest from the Earth as it heads to the Moon. We are now able to see us purely objectively, and we learned how tiny existence of the Earth is in the universe. It's very, very tiny. And this is my most favorite photograph taken regarding the universe. I understand that many of the astronauts who participates in the lunar landing, like Apollo project, they awakened to religion after landing the spacecraft to see the Earth from the universe. And some really became the preachers. It was amazing because they thought how beautiful and very tiny existence the Earth from the universe is very, very important. And did you see the movie of Gravity? It was very nice, impressed movie. The astronauts fly out from the spaceship and become alone, and how she felt lonely in the universe. It is a nice feeling nowadays we can feel like this. And maybe you probably know the world biography. It is a place where we living things, including human beings, are protected and nurtured. You also know that the biosphere is like a really thin film. Let's take a look at incorrectly. How thick is life on this planet we live on this every day? For example, the thickness of the biosphere is like 20 kilometers, just only 20 kilometers. Biosphere thickness is like 20 kilometers, and if we divide it by equatorial diameter, 12,756 kilometers, it's only 1/600. Very, very thin, right? Very, very thin. But even though we cannot imagine how thick it is. A globe with a diameter of 30 centimeters is a popular size in your table. Do you have a globe? Right? It's a very popular thing put on the children's table. And it seems like 30 centimeters. Then we can combine our imagination. If the Earth is like a globe, like 30 centimeters, biosphere's thickness is only 0.5 millimeter. Very, very thin. And if the Earth is like 30 centimeter, we human beings, it seems like a virus size, like this, very, very thin. Now we know the fact like this. It's kind of the another point of view to recognize ourselves by human beings' invention, like visualizing the map. Okay, back to the world map. Now take a look at the transition of the world map. This is the old map in the world. Can you see the double circle in this? It's drawn here. The inside of the inner circle is land. It's like a continent. And the space between the outer and the inner circles is the sea. There is no Eurasian continent, no American continent, no African continent, no Australia continent also. Only they describe like around the Bohemian, uh, uh, Babylonian. It seems like their world is like this one. And the next one is made in BC 194. Eratosthenes seems like another world map, right? But even though you cannot see the Americans, East Asia, even though Indonesian islands also, they don't have anything. Their world seems like that, like this. Okay. Even after opening the Middle Ages, we human being believes that the Earth was an infinite continent, and that there were an infinite African continent and infinite European continent. There are nothing more anymore. But however, human beings are finally able to create the nearly correct, accurate world map like this. But even though in this map, you can find something wrong. For example, the upper side of the northern part, the white continent is a Greenland, is very, very larger than it really is on this map. And can you see the bottom, the southern part? Antarctica. Antarctica seems like a belt. Of course, Antarctica is not a belt. It's island. It's a big island, like a continent, right? That's why the human being correct this wrong way to show the world map and become better. Especially the bending the longitude to show the right way. The area of each country now a little bit described mostly accurately. But even now, even though the Antarctica is like a belt, it's not like a belt. And also, even though the northern part and the southern part ratio is different, right? And finally, I want to show this one. This map was made before the satellite was launched. It was so amazing. It was made by Richard Buckminster Fuller, and is said to be Da Vinci in the 20th century. He wasn't like any other designers before, and wasn't influenced by preconceived ideas because he believed in pure intuition like a child. By the way, when this map was made, no one has seen the Earth from space because it's no rocket. There are no satellite in the universe. We only stay here on the land. We are grasped by the land, by the gravity. No one can jump to the universe. However, it is surprising because it is as close as possible to the shape of the Earth that we know now is very similar. It's amazing. He painted by his idea. The continent, it seems like green, and the desert seems like a gray, and also the sea is like a blue, right? And almost same like we saw from the sky, from the universe. And especially in this map, you can see the ratio of continents. Each continent is almost accurate. And also the none of the 5 oceans are interrupted. It's connected each other. And also all our continents are surrounded by the sea we can feel, we can find. And you can see that Antarctica is very large. The right one is Antarctica. Can you see in another map? In the flat map, we didn't know, right? And Antarctica is so huge. We are so surprised. We didn't think, we never recognized like this about that continent. We only concerned about the Eurasian continent, American continent, like that, African continent, but equally, how Antarctica is so important for us. And also, the Buckminster Fuller made another map, this one. Do you understand the meaning of color coding? It presents the warmest temperature during the coldest months of the winter. It's very, very important. Fuller wanted to convey that the cold is more important to life support than borders that separate countries. You know, usual globe, they want to separate the color coding because of the nations. Like this is America, this is Germany, this is French, like this. We divided by border, right? But from the sky, from the universe, there are no meaning. That's why he ignored. And he focused to the temperature. It's very important, how we living things can survive. And also, if we assemble this picture, and it become like the polyhedron. In this map, devised by Fuller, there is no top or bottom. You don't understand? Do you know what I mean? There are no north or there are no south. It's just around the very cute sphere. And there are no top and no bottom. And it's just like a sphere floating in our outer space. It's very nice experience it shows us. This is one of the way to show to recognize and show the world to another people. And by the way, I want to show the different picture. This map is a time map called Time Map by Kohei Sugiura, who is the great Japanese graphic designer who I really respect. Generally, in this map, presents a distance. Usually, you know, map presents a distance, right? But here, it presents the time it takes to reach each location from the capital Tokyo. The top one, upper one is from Tokyo. How does it take the time to reach to the another place? And the form of the map become like very strange. And also the second one, the bottom one is from Osaka, the second kind of the big city in Japan. And from Osaka, how does it take to reach to the another region? The shape become like this. It seems like a peeled shape of the orange, right? It teaches us that the development of the transportation has transformed the map in this way. I mean, design visualized in visual information. It's very important thinking for the nowadays, I think. And also the Kohei Sugiura made another globe. It transformed the time axis and distorts the the Earth by the number of the people, the population in the world. The center in this globe is a Eurasian continent. The right is China now, and the lower right is India, and the back left is the United States. Can you see? That's why it belongs to the population. It become a bigger and bigger, and if the population is become very few, the it bandit is like the lost the air balloon like this. It's very amazing. And the last one of the world map is, it's not by Kohesura. I found in the internet. This map makes the population proportional to the area, as you see, right? It turns out that China and the India are usually unusually large, especially the two big countries consist almost the biggest existence in the Eurasian continent, right? And also your country, Indonesia, and also the Japan has a big population. It's very amazing to visualize like this. Then we can find many informations from kind of the maps, more than the usual map, right? And now I want to change the topic a little bit. By the way, for children in the 20th century, what was the most important things of the design which the human being made? I think the planetarium is one of the biggest invention and the biggest design topics in this era, right? And the children met the universe at the planetarium like this. Of course, I remember when I was a child, I really dreamed to want to go to the universe and become the astronauts. I really dream. And I still remember in the graduation of the elementary school, we made a memorial book, and I write my future dream, and I want to be an astronaut. I still remember. And because of when I was a child, my parents and my school pushed me to go to the planetarium, and I encounter the universe there. It was so amazing time. The planetarium can be said to be one of the finest designs created by our human being in the 20th century. The planetarium gives us the opportunity to know the existence of the world we don't know. Not how to live in real world or how to make money. It's more important for the children is to know the existence, right? And this was invented by Walter Busfield at the Zeiss company. The Zeiss company is famous to make the lens of the camera. And the planetarium technology was mostly invented by in this era. Planetarium, the Germany 1925 is not so old time, right? Only just 100 years ago. And the Walter Busfield also made kind of the dome. A sphere was used for the screen that displayed the image of the universe. It was so amazing time. And also, in Japan, there are lots of the scientists or the many kind of the physicists or astronomers has same memory. When they were child, they visited to the planetarium, and they dreamed to be a scientist like that. And also, the one very important cartoon artist, mangaka, animation creator Osamu Tezuka, who invented the many kind of the scientific fiction, like very strong atom or like that. And he used to visit to the planetarium mostly every week. And finally, the staff of the planetarium preserved the sheet for him, even though he was child. And he, after getting older, he wondering to be a doctor or to be a cartoon artist, and he chose to be a cartoon artist. It's very important topics. And anyway, it was happened in 20th century, but now we're living in the 21st century, right? What is a planetarium in the 21st century? How do you think? And I think I want to show some pictures from now on, and you will know what I mean. And first of all, this story begins with the Tokyo Metropolitan Government building. This is a building of the center of Tokyo. And we go upstairs. We fly higher and higher in the sky to see the metropolitan buildings, and also more higher. Now we are now over Tokyo, like this, and like this. We are now looking down on Japan, the Korean Peninsula, China, and Taiwan is from space. And finally, we can find this one. It seems like another Earth made by pasting together full-scale photographs. It seems like another existence of the universe. Okay, let's take a look at some of the world's largest cities from the space from now on. And of course, you know now, this I told you already, right? This is a Tokyo. And someone, do you know what the city is it? The population is 8 million. Somebody turn off the mute and please answer me. Please turn off the mute. What city? Hello?
Maybe Tokyo?
No, sorry. Tokyo is this one.
Which country is this?
Okay, this looks like Manhattan and Brooklyn.
Really?
Sorry, I already misunderstood the show. It's New
Okay.
York. The center
Oh,
is
yes, New York.
Manhattan.
Ah,
Okay, the next one. What is this?
That's
The
London.
population is, yes, you're
Brazil.
right.
Brazil.
Yeah, the Thames River sweeps across the big city, and the 9 million people lives here. It's amazing. Then another one. Where is it? 2 million people lives here.
Paris.
The center of the city has a radial transformation network, and it's a so beautiful historical place in the world. So beautiful, but not so old ancient city. It seems like a modern city. It was made mostly 18th century. As you know, it's a palace, and the Seine River cross the center. Okay, another one. Sorry, I continue many things because I wanted to recognize the cities like this. The 3.6 million people lives here. Can you say it? What city in the world? Very famous city. Let's see you.
Beijing.
No, sorry, it's a Berlin in Germany. Okay, the next one maybe you will know. 20 million people live in here. And the city is separated by roads like a grid.
It's Beijing.
Yes, it's a Beijing. You are right. And it's a popular place for you, I think. Where it is? 20 million people live.
It's Jakarta.
Yes, you're right. You're right. Then another one.
Singapore.
6 million.
Singapore.
Yeah, Singapore. 6 million people lives here. All the seaside below is reclaimed with the artificial straight lines. There are no nature in the line of the seaside. It's very, very important we should recognize. The human being changed the shape of the land, the shape of the continent. And the Singapore, the area is about 2,648 times smaller than Indonesia. So tiny, unbelievable. But 6 million people lives here. It's amazing, right? Then another one. Maybe you know this picture, very popular.
Bye.
Bye.
Dubai, yes. The ludicrous human fantasy creates an animated, very terrible in nature.
So cute.
Very terrible. 3 million people live in the desert, and they change the shape of the space like a Disneyland. Okay, the last one. Do you know this one? 12 million population, and probably the busiest and most densely populated city in the world.
It might be Mumbai, I'm not sure.
Yep, Mumbai. Yes, you're right. And we observing kind of the big city from the sky because the Google Earth provided the kind of the picture for us nowadays, and it's update every year, and we can see the mostly really real one from the universe. I think it seems like another the planets. It seems like another view of the human eyes. And how do you think about the city looks like clay? I let you see, right? Mumbai like this, and also the Singapore, Jakarta. Seems like the center of the city according by the color of the clay. And in my point of view, the city seems like the cancer eats up the nature on earth. How do you think? Because the gray color is not so beautiful on the universe, it's not so good. And the planetarium of the 21st century not only gives the boy or girls only just a dream, but also possess the painful reality, I think. And I want to let you see a very short movie I pick up from the YouTube, and it's very, very nice, the movie. Maybe some people already found, but please enjoy the two movies I prepared. The time lapse of the Google Earth. Okay, you can see the Arctic is now warming at twice the rate of the rest of the global, it shows. And today Greenland is losing the ice even 7 times faster than it was in the 1990s. Like that, you know, about the oceans, I want to see the another movies. Please enjoy. They Arctic lost the snow. It was amazing. Crazy, right? And as I told you, today Greenland is losing ice 7 times faster than it was in 1990s. It's ice river become just like a water. And sea levels are rising 3.6 millimeter per year, the fastest rate this century, it said. If the current rate of warming continues, sea level rise up put more than 800 million people at least by 2050. It allowed. And sea level rise may be inevitable, but this should not lead us to inaction. And the sooner emissions are cut, the greater the reduction of the future sea level rise. Like this, you know, Google's is a planetarium at the 21st century, I really think. And you know, in the 20th century, the planetarium let the boy and girls to show the universe, right? But in this century, we focus to the Earth more than the universe. Very important problems we have already now. And I planned it from now. I dream of realizing a new planetarium by myself. It's not realized now and maybe very hard, but I dream this biosphereum. It seems like it is a huge globe with a diameter of 120 meters. And the surface is a huge screen with the LED lights. The screen is on time and shows an image of the universe, the Earth. The image is a realistic image of the Earth taken by the space satellite every time. Then we can see the real picture on the surface. In other words, you are looking at yourself from space, right? I dream like this. And also, can you see the ratio of the human size to sphere? It's so huge. And we feel like we become astronaut if this kind of the facility can be made. And how would you feel if the huge globe were to come true and to be in the natural environment? How do you feel now? It's of course computer graphics, but how do we feel? I really want to know. How would we feel if we installed the giant globe into the city. It's also very amazing. I think we should think of the Earth in the objective point. What we boys and girls think if they saw in the giant globe? In such a limited environment, like the very sphere, like the Earth, right? Do you not know the meaninglessness of the human beings fighting over national borders, waging economics war, and destroying nature? Isn't it much more meaningful than teaching the importance of the Earth in the class? I think only take a look at this kind of the existence. We feel we should keep safe and we should save the Earth more and more. It's very important existence for us and for the future. We have no time to fight each other, right? And finally, I want to conclude by my very tiny project. I'm shy to tell you, but when I was staying in Indonesia almost 10 years ago, I dreamed like this 1030 bamboo shelter because the bamboo is around in Indonesia, right? And I want to make a kind of a shelter according to the Buckminster Fuller, and I plant this one for the shelter. And I made with the ITB students together for 1 week. It was so nice experience for us to spending time together, and we all made by bamboo. We never use any equipment. We never use the machine anymore, only by hands. It was very important action for us. And finally, we made it. Okay. And this is not the planetarium, but it's connected to the kind of the dream, to the future, not realized now, just made a model. And the last was, I want to show the very important sentences. The world important thing about Spaceship Earth, an introduction book didn't come with it by Buckminster Fuller. Yes, we are the creatures that lives on the sphere planet and are entrust with their fate. It's up to you to waste it or make it better environment. We are just astronauts who are entrusted with the operation of the spaceship Earth. And I want to give you some words. We designers are moderators to inform the world of the fact to the audiences. And we should be a visual presenter to the people. It's kind of the good communication from us to them, and also it's our obligation, I think, not only to make a new product to the high good selling or become very high fashion design. For me, it's boring. Now it's very, very important thing is to concentrate to how to save our Earth is the mostly important responsibility for the designers, I think. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Bando Sensei.
Okay.
This is the amazing concept, heliocentric theory, as well as a lot of new paradigm from Buckminster Fuller. Bando Sensei have showed us how human beings change from being self-centered to knowing the reality that we don't live by ourselves in this earth. And I'm amazed as well as struck by the reality of the environment of the earth. And we got to learn how we living in this earth, the population is the world. The most important things of this design, how human being made, human being change the shape of land and the shape of continental. It's really amazing presentation, Bando Sensei, and it makes
Okay.
us think a lot. Thank you very much.
Oke, terima kasih.
Sama-sama. Okay, thank you. And now for the next speaker, I would like to introduce you everyone. Dr. Urmila Mohan is an anthropologist of material culture with a focus on clothing and bodily practice. She is adjunct professor, Department of Anthropology, New York University, where she teaches on museum and material culture. She has researched and published on materiality, praxis, and aesthetic in diverse contexts. And also, Dr. Mohan's project have been funded by Victoria and Albert Museum, London, and as well as Asian Cultural Council and Kobe Foundation Limited, New York, and Rotary International. She is a lifelong learner. She draws upon her educational background in anthropology, design, and art to connect these and other domains of knowledge. So, Dr. Urmila, the time and place is yours.
Thank you, Ami. Just trying to connect to my screen. I hope that you're seeing the right screen, the right slide. Yeah. Okay. View slideshow. Okay. First of all, thank you so much, Ami. Thank you, especially Lyra, for being a visionary and actually connecting connecting people who might not normally be in the same conversation space. And of course, thanks a lot to Design Culture Lab. It's so exciting to see what you're doing with this new project. And it really is very, very inspiring. So this is more of a rhetorical question, because I think it's obviously not something that we just address once and leave at that. It's more of a prompt for students to start thinking about, what could an anthropological focus or even a sociological focus that looks at the role of culture as this repository of a society's norms, beliefs, values. It's all of that ephemeral stuff that goes into our lives. And of course, as designers, you're very much immersed in that world. Even as we say, we don't want to make more products. Unfortunately, we are in this catch-22 where a lot of design schools are oriented towards that. So my attitude really is that if you are going to be putting stuff out into the world, and the world is going to get more full of stuff, how could you possibly minimize the damage that you do, either socially or culturally or environmentally, with a view to the future? So let's look at these 3 projects that I'm going to talk about, 2 in detail and 1 just in passing. So that's my background. Those are my publications. And broadly speaking, I'm interested in material and visual culture, but more oriented towards materiality as this intersection of bodily practice with the world outside. So definitely this constant dialogue between interior and exterior, right? So whether it's a manifestation of your ideas as a design student, or maybe you're coming into contact with what other people think and feel about what you're putting out into the world. It's constantly this dialogue between interior and exterior, and all of the things that we design in relationship with the body, in relationship with people, is essentially a social enterprise. And by social, I mean not a particular value-laden sociality, but just the general kind of neutral definition of sociality as relationships, and the emphasis of societies as containers of relationships. So the two projects I'm going to focus on, number one, which is more pertinent to students in Indonesia, is about the Museum Archives and Heritage Project. The second one will look at my current project in New York, which looks at more deeply interrogating this notion of what is community. Community is a word we throw around so much that it's almost become fashionable to say you're doing community-oriented design. But what does that really mean? Which community? Whose community? And the third one, just in passing, will be a very, very quick look at devotional practices. Some very, very rudimentary definitions. So I've been trying to see, just playing with words, and I'm sure that you can find very sophisticated definitions of these words in many, many publications. So this is just an overview. So if you think of anthropology as the science, right? The aim is science, a social science, a study of human beings, essentially asking what makes us human. For me, with a background in design, when I was in design school, I was always having this drummed into my head that design is, you're not an artist, right? You're not being completely subjective. Even though you use aesthetics and you use forms, and you may use beauty, it's primarily a science. So how can you use a combination of art and science? What is interesting for me is that both of these fields overlap in the realm of knowledge making. As designers, you are providing solutions. I know the word solution is a very basic term, but this idea, this emphasis on planning for a specific context or a specific human use, or even a future, it's always a future-oriented project. It's something that designers sees that is not yet in the universe. And anthropologists, of course, kind of situated themselves in a variety of different scales and positions in relation to designers, depending on whether they are applied anthropologists or whether they are social cultural anthropologists, and where they want to intervene. And traditionally, anthropologists actually don't intervene in the process. They study it and observe it, but their findings could be used. So what does that knowledge making in anthropology do? It enhances people's knowledge of a particular context. The goal is not, in anthropology, we should be really careful about this. The goal is not to, there really is a difference between an anthropology of design and designers using anthropological conclusions. And I think we always have to think about that nuance. But the common emphasis between the two is that these are both ultimately human activities. And what designers can probably get from anthropology is not just data or social science insights, but this constant emphasis on reflexivity. Who am I? Where am I in the world? How does my relationship to the world change things? Very simple diagram, right? So I'm going to talk about design under the rubric of making, because we know there's a very fraught discussion in terms of words like design and craft and art, especially in the Western world. So I'm going to lump all of that under this title of making and say, okay, we are humans. As humans, we are makers. We're constantly tinkering. We're working on ourselves, we're working on our environment. And of course, to make this a social practice, it has to be something that mediates between the individual and society. There is no society without a group of individuals, a group, when I say individuals, I would say persons.
Trendingnya kan misal tinggi kan paling ora wis esuk wis kudu aku.
Excuse me.
Mute ya.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, please.
Okay. Okay. So okay, so we're talking about relationships, and relationships are extremely complex because in sociology you have hierarchies of gender, of age, of religion, and it's not simply a question of wishing these away. Whatever visions we have for the future have to thrive within this really complicated social systems that we have developed over millennia. So if we look at a culture as a way of making, and if we think of cultural differences as different ways of making, as Moz talks about very famously in his study of techniques, I am interested in praxis and not exactly praxeology, but I do a combination of phenomenology and the techniques of how people do things. Because from the how, from what is external, from what is observable scientifically, from that you try to glean what the possible reasons could be for the why. So the meaning making actually comes from the how, and that's a lot of commonality with the way designers approach their field work or their ethnographic research and my interests. I also want to point out to how societies and cultures have their own ways of framing creativity. They have their own ways of thinking about innovation. So somebody might talk about jugaad, which is this notion of frugal innovation. It's taken on these connotations of, optimistic utopian ways of India making its way into the world. There have been severe critiques and backlash to this term when it's used in highly utopian ways. But I think there is something fundamentally useful in this idea of how do societies innovate? How does the new come into the world? And of course, you are doing that in your own institution in a very specifically cultural way in Indonesia. The question is, what would you consider as an Indonesian innovation or an Indonesian way of viewing design, or versus, I would say, the emphasis that perhaps somebody in India or America does. This is not just a question of identity, a design identity, but actually going to the field and saying, how do people do things? And from that, we move to the question of social values. These are these very abstract terms that we hear quite a bit, words like community, like care, like equity. But there are also social values that are not positive. There's competition, there's violence, there's envy, there are all these things. And societies have developed cultural ways of dealing with these kind of issues, right? So what is social is not necessarily a positive thing. And that's something we have to keep in mind. So the first project I want to go to is the Museum Archives and Heritage Project. And as designers, as students, you of course think a lot about, budaya and, in Indonesia, culture as being Indonesian culture. How does that get represented? How does that get manifested in objects? And of course, you have this history where objects from Indonesia go to other parts of the world as part of colonialism, as part of history. And they reside in these museums abroad, which actually have nothing to do with Indonesian culture. So what do you do with these objects when they're in storage and when they're in this freezer? How do you unfreeze them? How do you even try to recontextualize them? That's part of the knowledge making process. And I think that's also a source to which designers can turn. In my project, I look at historical connections through if we talk about the trade network, many of these objects came from India, textiles that came from India to Jakarta, then came to Bali and other parts, especially the famous fabric that some of you may be familiar with, which is patola. But to start with, we look at the archive as a collection of objects and ideas. So we have the Indonesian alcove in the Museum of Natural History, where I did the project. And you have this entire display, literally packed with these textiles. And these were amazing textiles, but being in that display case for so long, you wonder what's happened to them. So what is an interaction with these textiles and that museum space actually teach you? What does a visitor who's going to that space really understand about Indonesia by looking at these textiles? Very little. And I think that's the perennial problem of museums. You have these objects, how do you display them in a way that is going to evoke new knowledge? And of course, on the left, you have Margaret Mead, who was the anthropologist who went to Bali with her husband in the late 1930s. And she was the person who collected many of the archives, and also Gregory Bateson, her husband at that time, collected many Balinese textiles, which became the basis of my project. So going to Bali, looking at the continued emphasis on rituals, looking at Balinese Hinduism, observing how it differed from Hinduism as I knew it in India, was actually very, very stimulating for me on so many levels, and quite fascinating from a history, heritage, and cultural perspective. So as students, I would encourage you that if you're doing material culture work and you're producing things, you look at material culture theory, you look at the basics, you look at Appadurai, his famous work on the social lives of things from the 1980s, which is still so fundamental to the way we think about objects and object flows. And you think about objects as constantly being in circulation. So is it the concept of trade, the objects you put out? What kind of trade networks are they going to be part of? What kind of consumption networks? What kind of popular culture? Context. So how will the things that you design, whether it's graphics or videos or textiles or spaces, what will shift the meaning of those things in the future or now, depending on who uses it? So we always think about context in anthropology and emphasis, right? So what will your design focus on in terms of values and beliefs, and whose values and beliefs? So you're always being, I'm sure you're being encouraged by your professors to have dialogues with people in the field to say, okay, we want to know what you care about, so we can channel those or maybe dialogue with those values. Here's a very simple example of object flows. Object flows do not always have to be these mega global, epic adventures. It's something very simple that happens even within Bali, for example, when a textile goes from one part of the island to another part. So here's a textile being woven on the right-hand side. It's a chapbook, a very traditional Balinese textile, which mediates the relationship between this kind of spirit realm as well as the person's body, especially when the individual is going through something very traumatic, like the tooth filing. I'm sorry, I know it was a mistake here. It should be labeled tooth filing on the left-hand side. So something that's potentially could completely change the context of the body and shift it and make it temporarily very vulnerable. And cultures notice these changes. These are ideas and values that have developed over centuries. They come from common Indonesian practices. Tooth filing is found in other parts of Indonesia as well. But the textile over here moves from the producer in Nusa Penida and then goes to Ubud, which I'm sure many of you are very familiar with, in that touristic space, in that very, very different and quite unique part of Bali, to be part of a tooth filing ritual held side by side with the cremation ritual. So why are these textiles being layered? Why are they being layered on the body? And that's the question I want to follow. And of course, that kind of unpacks the story as to why the textile is being made and why those particular aesthetics are seen as being powerful. The point of all of this is to ultimately try and see if a connection can be made between the rituals as they're being performed today and the traces of those rituals as recorded by these anthropologists in the late 1930s. On the upper left-hand corner, you see an example of the cremation ritual. While the form of the specific objects may be different, I think some of the essential functions they are performing cosmologically is very similar. So here's my question to you. What kind of objects do you see in these pictures? What kind of materials do you see here? And how do they relate, not just relate to human beings, but how do they relate to each other? Why is one object placed on top of the other? Why is layering so important here? What is the representational as well as embodied value of these objects? And what do these objects make it possible to do? If we cannot find any functional use for these objects, what does it make it possible for this culture to do? So we're getting closer and closer to this notion of, the cognitive functions of some of these objects. And what does it say about the culture broadly, even under the rubric of heritage? So fast forward to maybe something you're more familiar in your immediate environment. We know that patola textile motifs are still used today. We know that they are so influential, especially in Nusa Tenggara, in those islands. Patola textile has been interpreted and reinterpreted in so many truly innovative ways. So on the right-hand side, you have a textile from Flores, where you can clearly see the Chabri Bat motif has been reworked to take in the values and cosmology of a completely different culture. So we have moved from a textile that was exported from Western Gujarat and India all the way to Eastern Indonesia, right? And that is what is the amazing flexibility of textiles, of motifs, of aesthetics. It's not just superficial, it really embodies the way people look at the world. And of course, on the left-hand side, if you go to Malioboro to any or many of the stores, you still see patola-inspired textiles being used in rituals and also on fabric. And the last image really is more of a commentary on heritage, where certain things are elevated in culture as being representative of a culture, right? So why is the joglo so important to the imagination of, say, Javanese culture? What is this notion of vernacular design? Why is the vernacular so important at this point in time? And I think when we talk about heritage, we should have that double consciousness, that is not simply an unmediated view of the past, but to understand why certain things become important and certain periods of time. And this was actually very kindly an image kind of shared with me by a Japanese scholar who was a colleague who found it quite amusing to be part of this photograph. The second project is quite different. So it takes us from Indonesia to the US, but it still deals with the thread of practices. And as we all got so kind of decontextualized and temporarily shaken up and continue to be influenced by COVID and the way it's changed our life practices, I got very interested in how cloth was being used by mask makers. So we see that on the left-hand side of the map, COVID is continuing to ravage the US. And on the right-hand side, we see as early as last year, June, that these memorials were coming up where people were the human need to want to memorialize, to want to remember loss, to want to make it something that can be externalized and understood. Fundamentally, we know that practices can shape the landscape. And this was absolutely fascinating for me to see how during the months of March, April, May, June of 2020, the landscape where I was living changed. Suddenly, people could not go into the office. They could not go to the gym to exercise. And you started to see hundreds of people just out on the streets, out on the pavements, on the curbs, running or exercising. And that literally, of course, left this pathway that was still there 6 months later in the grass. And that was absolutely fascinating. This idea that, yes, on a micro level, how we change the environment is something we can definitely observe. The other things that, of course, you also notice is that we have social distancing, the way we do things has changed. And these are all practices that make us cultural as well as social. The way we represent ourselves, masking has become a huge way of kind of mediating our own individual body with the environment around us. A lot of communities formed around the world, and I'm focused on the US, which formed as volunteer groups. And that was what was so amazing. These were people who got together via social media, and just in that panic and that urgency and that crisis of US not even having masks or any kind of PPE, hospitals asking for masks, NGOs asking for masks. It was individual citizens who just got together, and the most iconic, I think, would be the anti-sewing squad that literally was started by a performance and theater artist. So this was an artist with a political position, also a position in California. And it was Christina Wong who started this group, started by a group of Asian American women. And she was able to mobilize a bunch of people, and this group just grew across the US. And these were the kind of photographs that people were sharing on their Facebook, and they also sent it to me as part of my research. So over here, you have this notion of what is mutual aid, correct? So mutual aid as being different from what we think of as a developmental organization or an NGO. And we saw a lot of these mutual aid groups developing or popping up in the US in response to what they saw as the failure of infrastructure, the failure of the government. So it was really was a socially, I would think it was a social upheaval, truly a social movement where people realized that they could no longer rely on the old systems that had taken care of them, and that they had to protect themselves. And what did they do? They literally went to their sewing machines and made these masks. Most of them people who had never sewn before. Literally near my house, you could go out there. People were still doing this, sewing masks, keeping them out on a clothesline. It was the honor system. There was no one there to monitor you, to make sure that nobody stole the masks. People just came by. If you wanted the mask, you took it, and then you were expected to do the honorable thing and just pay for it and donate to a mutual aid group. So fascinating to see how practices for an anthropologist lead you into this terrain. So what was happening with religious practices during this time? People were, of course, turning to religion to sustain them during this time. We've also seen a lot of interesting pushback against masking, against vaccination in different parts of the world, many times associated with religion. So the religion has this flexibility where it helps you deal with it in different ways. And this was in a Mexican-American restaurant with a family that I've been working with, a mother and daughter. And struggle of surviving during COVID as a business, and also the continued faith in the Virgin, continuing with that, and my attempts to kind of situate the way of religious practices against the pandemic. So these practices continue for people, and for many, it intersected very interestingly with mask making. So on the left-hand side, you have a picture from a Buddhist Lao monastery in California. And these were monks who, when they heard that the anti-sewing squad was making these masks, just said, we have all these robes that were, given to us during robe ceremonies by the congregants. Could you just take these robes and sew them into masks to protect people? So a really, really interesting case of recycling, reuse, and the way that we could say religion intersects with the political through the idea of making. And the last thing I want to look at very, very briefly is because Professor Bando talked about the planetarium. I found it interesting because in one of my projects, the one that I based my doctorate on, I was looking at devotional clothing, and there you have the man doing that really intricate embroidery. And you have an image of the deities, Radha and Krishna in India, in Mayapur. The image you see in the center, which looks like a European or an English cathedral, rather like a Fabergé egg on top, is actually supposed to be a combination of religion and science. It's supposed to contain both the deities as well as their notion of Hindu cosmology based on the Vedas. So again, very, very interesting as a cultural phenomena, how people want to continue to combine religion and science. And of course, there's a lot of contestation and debate around this. And I find that personally very interesting because it's also processes of mediation. So I think that kind of brings me to the end of the presentation, and just quickly recap a lot of these things we talked about: the future, the transcendental, whether it's technology showing us how the world could be in the future. We should never forget that these are ultimately human ways of looking at things. Technology is cultural. It doesn't just reveal the world to us in new ways, it shapes us in turn. So we're constantly being shaped, as Donna Haraway talks about the cyborg, we're constantly being shaped as these human machines. And I think that fits in very well with material culture, where we say the subject is always a subject with the body, with the objects, with other people. You're always networked. There is no such thing as a non-networked individual. So when you design something, your objects enter into this vibrant space of relationships. And that is the complication, where you can no longer control what they do and the kind of effects they have. So I'm going to stop right here, and thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Urmila Mohan. On this talk, Dr. Urmila Mohan proposed that an anthropological focus on making forms a space where design and anthropology meet, or rather are entangled. She notes how the different meanings of design span process and product, and must include how makers themselves are reflexive participants in the societies they shape. Dr. Mohan will illustrate this idea by exploring values and beliefs of the human in the two research projects across Indonesia and the US. Okay, well, thank you very much, Dr. Urmila Mohan. So, for the next speaker, I would like to introduce you everyone. Yeah, Dr. Lyra Anindita Utami. She is graduated from Bandung Institute of Technology, ITB, and she is also undergraduate program in Design Product Laboratory Faculty of Art and Design, ITB, and she is graduated from Chiba University, doctoral program in Design Culture Laboratory Faculty of Engineering. Dr. Lyra explores design philosophy, particularly that facilitate design practice as experiential learning mechanism. Well, also encouraging the use of anthropological approach as tools to design, and she is interested in implementing better design education for design students and hence. She is also initiate design culture lab in UNS with Dr. Pandu Purwandaru, and create the Nitani learning approach as equivalence the Japanese concept of noni dete seikatsu wo manabu for the student and participating individual who practice design for community empowerment. In hopes it could become a platform where design can be understood and practiced holistic to support better living practice. So Dr. Lyra, the time and place is yours, and I will share the material presentation.
Okay, thank you, Ami. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Peace be upon everyone. I think I'm going to use my headphones here. to minimize the background sound. Okay, can everyone hear my voice clearly? Ami?
Yes,
Dr. Nana.
here.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Ami, for giving me the floor. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Dr. Urmila, and also Professor Bando. Ohayo gozaimasu. I'm really excited to be here with all of you. Well, listening to both of your lectures, I've made a lot of thoughts. Very well. For my part, I think I'm going to deliver something rather fundamental. Today is also special because Design Culture Lab is being born. Many people ask though, what is design culture? Better yet, what does it design? But then the question becomes on how we understand design and culture. Before I start, I'd like to address everyone here who attends. How do you understand design and culture? Any thought? What is design? Students, anyone can answer my question. What do you think about design? What do you think about culture?
Reading about for problem solving,
Okay, that's for design. And what about culture?
about living.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Ami. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, here I think I'd like to bring up a quote from Johannes Kepler, who was a professor at a School of Design in Hong Kong, actually. And he has wrote many books about design theories. So this is one of his theory. And it's also something that have been brought up over and over again back when I was still a design student. So according to him, design is to design a design, to produce a design. What can we all observe here, actually? That there is design, the general concept, as a general concept, and also the outcome, as we all know. But there's also design as the action or set of action. Then there is design as the intention, as planning, where the intention is being articulated. Where here is interesting because this area lies design that facilitates the process of learning and acts of learning. So here later why our lab is called Design Culture Lab. By our context, that is education and empowerment of community by design, design is not only perceived as a logical set of action or judged by the outcome, but fundamentally, it's the process. It's a set of planning to create a desirable human life. I mean, desirable human life is not just material stuff. It also includes spiritual life as well, and social life as well. So hence, it implies the creation or even the creating of values and creating together of values in terms of social interaction. So design is not only materially satisfying, but it needs to also be spiritually satisfying, aesthetically, and also life supporting. In design culture, what we design here is living. Okay, next. Here is the important reflection. When we think of the term designing living, design culture. So I'd like to invite you students, as well as honorable designers that attend today, to reflect on these things. Of course, today from Bando Sensei's lecture and also from Dr. Urmila's lecture, we all have a lot of reflection. And then now we got invited to reflect on these things again. What is humankind? What is our nature? Where do we live? What makes us different to other living beings? If you pay attention to previous lectures, I'm sure you can answer all of this. And then everything that exists on this earth must serve a function, even dust. Everything around us provides a service or two to other things that will in turn provide service to human beings. But here, human beings is as a character, as a sole character. But then we came to learn that we are not sole being living upon this earth. So each of us, we too serve a function or two to other living beings. Thus, we create and we are a part of the ecosystem, right? Each of us and them have potentials that needs to be discovered and developed for the good of all beings. If we can reflect on this matter, design practice will be meaningful because it facilitates us to learn about all things. The observing of what is, or discovering what should be or what not should be, becomes everyday reflection. Okay, next. Then there is this fundamental question about basic needs of human in terms of being that learns, feels, think, and make things. Like Dr. Urmila's lecture before. We constantly tinker on things. That's our needs as one of the living beings. And then you can all read here. So if these examples of essential needs are neglected, not thought upon or abandoned, the act of designing and making has to be reconsidered. That's what we think. History needs to be revisited and relearned. Designers need to have a strong concern and extensive knowledge about this, about what should be, what is actually needed. Next. Then to know about all those stuff and to polish that reflects, what we must do is actually this, very simple. In my years of learning in Japan, in Chiba University Design Culture Unit, I actually became fascinated by this philosophical precept. So this philosophy is introduced by Professor Miyazaki Kiyoshi since the initiation of Design Culture Lab. And since then, it has become a philosophy that's inherited and passed on by our professors to us, and now from us to all of you. It's also simple, and yet it is all we constantly forget as human beings, as a being who learns and feels and thinks and make and creates all the time. One can never calculate the depth of the saying. Anyone here can tell me what it means? Okay, Tingre, please. Next, Ami. So to learn about life in the field, as we learned back then, has the meaning of becoming actively engaged in learning the ways of life and wisdom from the local people and in their fields of living. The act of observing. When I learned about the meaning of learning in Japanese understanding, I was amazed by how it emphasizes experience. So in Japanese, experience is taiken. Tai means body, and ken means getting the knowledge. So it is actually a process of knowing by active participation of the body. It's the confirmation of the body for the knowledge that we acquired. So when experience is the key word to learning, to participatory learning, learning and designing becomes connected. Design cannot be separated from the active learning by experience because they facilitate our understanding, our knowing of things.
Pemanggilan dan penayaan ya harus pakai itu nanti aja pakai itu.
Okay, I think somebody needs to mute. I'm sorry. Ami, can you mute?
Program sarjana dan program diploma.
Excuse me,
Can you mute?
cannot. Maybe the host.
Okay, wait. Let me find who
Fakultas
is.
Ekonomi. Lulusan terbaik Doktor Ilmu Ekonomi Florentinus Heru Ismadi IPK 4,00.
Rudy Rubiandini, please mute your voice. Okay, yeah,
Okay,
that's clear.
where was I? Okay.
Okay,
So design cannot be separated from the act of learning by experience because they facilitate our understanding, our knowing of things through making observation, investigation, and planning out things. And after we learned that what we want to plan or make becomes our intention. And that is how design is understood in Japan. Isho. It is an act of materializing our will, what we intend. We transfer our intention into forms. If you can understand this, then this is how value is then created. So design needs to be valuable. Next. So here is what happens in experiencing, as I'm sure every one of you would already know. The mind, heart, and body that interacts with objects, tools, and environment, where sensation is produced and will is created. And here, experience becomes the action of understanding through creative processes. When we experience, our body observes and senses things. Our bodily sensorium encounter things, surfaces, substances, actions, or other people, other bodies, other thoughts and feelings. And what comes from it, we signify, we record so we can analyze later, so we can create the knowledge. The result, as perception, is reflected by our heart that feels and projected in our mind so we can collect more information and then we create more knowledge. And then later we can plan and make things better. This is the key point in to learn about life in the field. Do you know where the term record comes from? One hint. The term record comes from a Greek word. Maybe you can search later. Where does it come from and what does it actually mean? Okay, next. So that is the importance of experience in design practice. Experiences occurs all the time, and in designing activity, it occurs in situated moment and actions. Only when experience is reinforced by your feeling heart and thinking mind can they grow into aesthetic experience. So I'm sure all of you know aesthetics, but do you really understand what aesthetics means? That we need to revisit and that we need to relearn. And so here you can understand what makes aesthetic quality in design. And having aesthetic quality means your design can fulfill those essential human needs and create a meaningful life, if we reflect on the matter previously. Okay, next. So here is one example of participatory learning and action. At that time, I got lectures from Bando sensei, like all of you right now. I got fascinated with polyhedral structure that my undergraduate thesis at that time was about exploration of polyhedral structure for Indonesia's disaster tea shelter. I found out from the study how polyhedral structure like Diamond Dome, for example, has similar system to our vernacular architecture in terms of resiliency to earthquake. I learned so much and still studying about that until now. I think it's a lifelong obsession, pretty much. And the activity that I participated became a very important learning process that shapes my way of thinking today. So here I would like to show you 2 videos here. So Ami, can you please share? Thank you.
Wah.
Sorry. Kamera-kamera rusak.
Sialan.
Lagi sih, Pak.
Sini lagi. Balik.
Just enjoy a little bit of 4 minutes for two videos.
Nengok belakang dong.
Ini sangat ringan. Gak dibedain, Bu.
Lagi?
Hah?
Saya mau ngomong sini.
Sir ngomong sir.
Rekam apa video?
Iya ngerekam video sama sir.
You can fast forward a little bit, Ami, to the process. Okay.
Oh iya. Apa?
Okay, that's enough. It's okay. So as you can see, it failed. The first project was failed, but we didn't stop. Okay, let's see the second.
Area. Ada di sini, Sir. Hadir.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ami, for helping me present the video. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So it was a memorable moment and also as well as satisfactory, because it kind of like fulfilled the joy of learning and making, and more importantly, to persevere in the face of failures, I think. For your information, experiencing failures are the best teachers. Without it, there will be no learning to improve. So for students, please don't be so sad if you make failures. And our education system needs to encourage learning from failures, not only competing with each other for who can be the best designer, but who can be the best at learning from experience, I think. Okay, next slide. Then we come into the next projects that just necessitates participatory learning and action. So this project is initiated into 2020 by Dr. Bando, in which I also happen to participate as facilitator. And now, apart from students, experts from different disciplines are coming together to realize this. So this is a community empowerment project in Sabrang village, and that's located in the Langgu district, Central Java. So one focus of the project is actually to make a mutual learning platform in the form of designing activities that bridge the designer participants with the non-designer participants, and to familiarize them with design processes, especially collaborative design processes. Next. So for people who come from Central Java, I'm sure you must know where the Langgu is and what the Langgu is famous for, right? I'm told that it is very famous with rice, type of rice called rojolele. So here's just a glimpse of where the Langgu is located and just the surrounding scenery behind the village of Sabrang. This is one of the sites where we are doing where our project is currently conducted. So next. So in our project, we came across a very interesting word called miteni. When we look at it closer, I mean, discussing with a lot of people, discussing with my family, discussing with all of the people here, Javanese seniors, we learned that it is actually a form of learning. In native Javanese language, miteni means to observe, to pay attention or to read the surrounding through observing natural phenomena repetitively, and then to create a record that signify the wildlife activities or natural phenomena and how it influences the agricultural processes. It is a local wisdom actually that created the traditional knowledge system called the Pranata Mangsa, or it is the established time guidelines actually for various social and economic activities centered around farming and planting. But since the climate change, the farmers cannot apply the Pranata Mangsa anymore. But since Niteni is indigenous way of knowing that produce the worldview and certain actions, it can be understood by even non-designers here in Javanese culture. So this is our mental preparation to learn about life in the field. The key is to read so that we can act through designing things. We can produce a thoughtful design that fulfill the needs of us for our community, because we created the community. We are a part of it as well. Next. And that's what we are formulating through the activity within the Designing Living project that we call Design Survey. That actually an exploratory activity that prompts the participants to prepare their learning body by Niteni. It means by being open-minded and to just be curious about things. And design survey is ever present through the whole project, because if we truly niteni, there will always be new things to discover. Next. From implementing niteni in design survey, all of the information needs to be shared and discussed. So for those who participate in design survey, a lot of things we consider local potentials are to be recorded. People who live in the area might not see that their farming culture is their strength, for example, that their food reflects their tradition, or that their harvesting ritual actually is a way to honor the bond that they have with the rice plant, for example, with the larger cosmos. We lend our senses, our mind and heart to the community so they can be motivated to see their everyday activities, objects they make, tools they use as local treasures and full of potentials. The first significant step in idea generation then was to get all involved parties to recognize these treasures around them and to understand the various potentials they store in relation to what kind of priorities needs to be addressed and what kind of service or activities that should be designed or should be proposed or should be initiated. This process is iterative because we don't just make the projects, but we ourselves conduct a living with them. Okay, next. Therefore, in designing living methods, the design process reflects the growing with the collaborating community. We are a part of them, thus we grow with them. When we position ourselves in this way, it will be easier to understand how life should be in the community, in the lived environment. We learn together with them and them with us. Thus, we can know and hopefully understand what should or should not be made in the design. What can habituate a better culture, a better education, for example, for all of the people. And then what we need to be aware of is that designing living projects ultimately facilitates the creation of social bonds of relation. Next. So a glimpse at the start of designing living projects in Sabrang will be shown in a video, a bit of the video. Ami, please share the video. So the project revolves around revitalization of the almost extinct local rice variety to revive the traditional farming methods. Are you ready, Ami? Okay, so the revitalization of rice variety is called Rojo Lele Dalangu, is actually to revive the traditional farming method that supports the local ecology. So this includes, for example, reviving cultural festivals related to farming culture. For example, like harvest rituals, harvest celebration. I'm sure in Japan as well, they have this kind of like culture. And then with the strength of local produce, the food culture could also be reintroduced. And since we would be having abundant agricultural byproducts, for example, such as rice straw or bamboo, and since there was a culture of using straw as materials, straw craft then could become another potential. all of this are explored by the community. Ami, are you okay with the video? So that was the overview of the first video that's created by Dr. Pandu as well in here as the initiator to bring the awareness. And then until today, we are still together, we are still conducting the projects in Sabrang, and then it expanded to long-term projects as well. Hopefully we can create together in the future. Okay, so the next slide. So therefore here I was to convey that we need to be aware of design as facilitating as well as necessitating the process of learning too. It's not just the outcome that we think about. It's not just the general concept of design, but the most important thing is the thing in between, the process of learning as well as observing, as well as knowledge acquisition, sharing, and the relation making. And that we could indigenize the design activity so that even non-designers could understand the essence of design, of our effort, of what we are trying to make. And then here we need to re-evaluate how we think about design in our culture, in the context of Indonesian culture, and probably in the context of Javanese culture specifically. And what design should be when we want our design to serve the right function for creating a better life and for design itself to become a kind of reflex in our lives. Okay, next. And then when we think about good design, I think this is the essence, that it needs to bring about the totality of men. It facilitates the unity of what is right, what is good, and its quality could drive aesthetic experience. This is the ideal of designing living that ultimately encourages a better culture. So the good design, while addressing a problem, it articulates a meaning as well. In cherishing the design objects that socially exchange, here also service for the community, attachment is also formed. Human being goes to form a relation. The artifact also serves a relation. This is what facilitated by aesthetic quality of design. That is also why we see harvesting ritual here, for example, in a Sabrang project. because by our ancestors' design, the ritual serves a function to preserve the relation of humankind and the natural world, right? If you can reflect on this, like why were the ancestors have this kind of like complex rituals, complex birth ritual, growth ritual, and so forth. So if one understands this, one will understand the logic and the ethics of design. So design is idealistic by nature, because if it's not, it becomes a destructive tool. That's what I think, and that's what I also quote from Victor Papanek, and as well as Buckminster Fuller. Much like education, when it is not well designed, I think, then how come we are hoping to create a responsible and ethical society? As educators, I think we should reflect on that most profoundly. Okay, next. Okay, and that is how the fundamental thinking of design culture laboratory, in which its design context is living, is formed. From learning about life in the field in the form of niteni, our design should follow the meaning of life. And that appreciation of life needs to be projected through designing living, as well as iteratively polished through craftsmanship. Because craftsmanship is also one of the local strengths in the community that we are collaborating with. Okay, next. Okay, was it long? Sorry, but thank you for listening. Or in native term, matur nuwun sampun niteni. Goseichou arigatou gozaimashita. Thank you very much, Ami.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Lyra. That was the presentation by Dr. Lyra. We got to learning the act of observing, reading, and discovering, and the act of and making has to be reconsidered, and to learn about life in the field. From the Niteni learning approach, we learned that designing living becomes a practice to create a better culture for all of us living on this only earth. Okay, now we are going to the next session, which is a discussion. Okay, right now I will see for the question list. There are a lot of questions.
There are lots of discussion as well. The chat room is very active. I'm very proud. I'm very happy.
Yeah, I will read the first question. Maybe we will discuss together. And the first question, wait. Okay, the first question from Valino Benaya Setio, that he asked about what is the right strategy with the rapidly growing population in the world in order to protect the environment with the sociology of art. Yeah, please, would you like Bando Sensei to add the answer of this question?
I already wrote the answer to the chat line,
Okay.
right? But
okay.
I will tell you again, okay? Because, you know, sometimes we designers misunderstood, we should make something, the products to the consumers, but mostly important is we have an ability, capability to visualize the information. Sometimes it make alarm to the people. It can show to the people the problem of the big point. It's very, very important for us because, you know, we have a force. That's why we should use our force in the right way. That's why sometimes we should think about, we should stop the project by our decision. If the project is wrong, sometimes designer want to follow the schedule or the timetable, but sometimes we should insist, we should stop it. It's very important attitude nowadays, and we should turn back to our thinking. What should we say? Even though the society complained to the designer, why you never why you never contribute to the project like that? But sometimes we should choose the right way. For example, my former professor, Shutaro Mukai, I really respect him. He was once the industrial designer, but after the Japanese economy become increasing higher and higher, 1960 or 70, he stopped to design industrial design. He chose to be an educator, and he wrote the very nice design articles to show to the young people, you should be a critic more than the making some stupid things. And I really we human being now start to think about the face to the reality, like climate changes or coronavirus. Lots of the problem happens now. We should face to the big project, the how to contribute there, and during the time how we should make the life is more happier than you can imagine. Right now, other people was disappointed nowadays tendency, but most important is the designer should encourage the people, they can live more better and better. It's a mostly important responsibility for our designers, I think. That's all I want to say.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, and one more thing, sorry, I want to include more important topics. Several years ago, I visited to Bali Island to meet Linda Garland, who was an Irish interior designer. Unfortunately, she passed away already. But at that time, it's a really impressed moment for me, because I really respect her, because he was once the very good, talented interior designer, contribute to the rich people in the world. But she started to live in Bali Island to preserve the local architecture, and she pushed the designer to use the bamboo materials, right? And when I met her, I asked her, what should we do, our designer? And she said to me, stop design, stop stupid design anymore. You should encourage the bamboo craftsmen and go back to Japan to teach the more young people to engage to the craft work more than to contribute to the industrial design. And the Japan has a lots of the very talented bamboo craftsmen. That's why you should preserve them, and please introduce to the Indonesia more high work by the creates. And she asked me, you want to be a product designer or industrial designer, but you have more important obligation, she said. And I was ashamed so much. I want to make some new product which become the very famous in the world, but she denied so much. It was so impressed time for me. I changed my mind by her opinion. I really respect his attitude. That's all I want to say, okay?
Thank you very much, Bando Sensei. I'm really sad that Linda Garland has passed away.
Yeah. I think so too. But her mind, her thinking is still continue in the many designers in the world. Yes.
Oh, Ami, you're still mute.
Okay, thank you, Bando Sensei. Would you like to add Dr. Lyra or Dr. Urmila Mohan?
I think probably Dr. Urmila should go first. please.
So I'm sorry, I'm going to ask again. What's the question?
What was the question for that?
Maybe, yeah, actually for the comment that Dr. Urmila Mohan talking about the failure. Maybe from this, you said that you wonder if the failure is perceived and valued differently by culture. And maybe this is interesting for discuss together right now. And what you like to add about this?
For me, I find it very interesting because I think that, you know, I'm looking at these terms with a kind of double consciousness. It's like one that we, and I want to come back to this again. There is design culture, which is like design culture lab, where clearly there's a very practical thing, right? So, but then they also have this culture within which designers themselves are trying to figure out what the future of the field should be, what the future of design education should be. So that's why I'm fascinated by the chat conversation and, you know, the ideas that Professor Bando and Dr. Lyra are talking about, because it very much comes from a practitioner's point of view, which I find very, very interesting, but that's what I study. But this notion of failure, I think that it's super interesting because even if we did for a moment bracket the notion that failure itself is a universal category, which, you know, people could contest that it's not. The word itself is a particular linguistic context, particular cultural context. I am fascinated by how failure, if we look at the opposite of failure, and I love the way Lyra was kind of trying so hard to frame failure as a pivotal moment, right? A pivotal moment of teaching, of education, which itself is a certain kind of pedagogical construct, a certain kind of, when I say pedagogical, I mean also not in the universal sense, but the cognitive, but also in the cultural sense of, you know, trying to teach Indonesian students that you should not be ashamed to fail at something. So I think in an American context, from my classroom, if I was teaching students who are trained maybe in a different cultural context or are turned by the time they come to college, and you're using the Socratic method and everything is about discussion and dialogue, ideas are always produced through synthesis, right? So could there be a possibility of failure, and what would that failure look like in that kind of dialogue context? So I think that from a pedagogical and educational perspective, failure could mean different things in different classrooms. On the other hand, I am really fascinated by how, you know, different cultures, I hazard, have different ways of containing outcomes. Every culture has a way of containing an outcome for social balance. And if failure becomes something that is too excessive, you know, is there a certain threshold of failure that a society, and by analogy, a design can contain before it becomes excessive? So maybe we should not talk about failure or no failure, but what is the optimum, and how much of flexibility do cultures have in their capacity to live, to deal with failure? And of course, you know, it's a very, very complicated situations and context. So I'll just throw it out as a prompt.
Thank you very much, Dr. Urmila.
Very much.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. Would you like to add, Dr. Lyra?
Yeah, I think I don't know. I was just like reflecting back on failure because I don't know if I was reflecting back with the education that I was brought up in at school, for example, at formal school. I mean, not at home, because at home, thankfully, my parents are kind of like always emphasizing on kind of like failures. You should learn from failure, because I mean, no one can just like go and be successful at always, right? At their moments of in life. But in the formal education, failure of something has been something that is really shameful, or at least in my education back then. Even at some point in my formative years of university, the first years of university, you know, being failed at drawing, you know, because we are designers, we have to be able to draw, right? And then we have this classroom where we have to draw a still life, a person in the middle of the room, and then we have to draw. And then some of the students, some of my friends were very much ashamed when they perceive their drawing as not satisfactory, you know. And for them, it is failure, and they are very ashamed of it, my friends. And I got affected too, because then I reflected on what I drew, and I was like, oh my God, I think I'm failing too. I think the shadow is not right. The lines are not were not, you know, drawn right, and things, and we are just too focused on these failures as something being shameful, as something that stops us, rather than trying to improve ourselves. And of course, I don't know, like the education system at that time is also not really focusing on how to improve from failure, right? How to pivot from failure, how to perceive failure as a tool, as a jumping point, right, to get better. So yeah, that's why when I was in that in participating in Bando Sensei's workshop at that time, becoming the workshop director at that time, I failed. When we failed, I got ashamed, really. I got ashamed. I never told this to Bando Sensei, but I was so ashamed because I didn't calculate right, or I didn't motivate the other participants right. It's just too much pressure, but I tried not to. But then Bando Sensei said, it's okay. We can always try. We can see which needs to be improved at which point of that particular shape of diamond that needs to be improved. And somehow it kind of, he's not mad at me because I failed the project. Instead, he showed us on how to tread on this failure, and then he showed us, all the participants, and how to calculate better. So it has become a change, a pivotal moment for me. I think that's what I can add. So that's why I want students here to not feel ashamed of failure. I mean, like, if you fail, and you just jump out of it. You know, I know it's really hard to practice that, and it's really easy to say things like that, but the practice comes quite hard. But we need to practice that.
Yeah, and I think this is something that non-design students could learn from design students. I think students have got so focused on getting the right answer, writing the right way, getting the maximum points, getting the best grades. I think this is something that designers and craftspeople and artists, with their focus on making as something that is the emerging process, the emerging value. Value is produced as you're doing it. We talk a lot about the importance of process and design. We don't talk a lot about process in academia. So thank you for making that comparison.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I will read the one question from Dr. Pandu Purwandaru. He gave the feedback. Change in the world today and in the future are very influential from government policy. They are mostly focusing on the economy as the measure of success. Therefore, massive exploitation is carried out. What is our today's honorable speaker's opinion about our effective strategy as a designer to respond to this situation? Okay, maybe for the
I
first.
think this should be answered by Bando Sensei and Dr. Urmila Sensei.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Yeah, it's a very, very nice question. Yes, of course, it's a reality, right? We designers cannot only dreaming, right? We should face to the reality, of course, as you know. That's why, I insist we designers should be strong because we are very weak, very, very weak. We follow to the economies, we follow to the capitalism, we follow to the government policy, right? That's why if we give up, how another the rest of the people can help us, right? We are the deadline, we are the last line, we stay here. That's why we should keep it to insist. For example, that's why I told you, right? We have a ability to visualize our true feeling or true information. And we have a equipment now, SNS, internet, many things make it equal the power, not only the broadcasting company, right? We have the same situation, same point of view, same standing point. That's why we can make it realize for example, the two things or important, mostly important value on the SNS, even though by ourselves, by in the one step, but we can show the information. For example, if you can make a new world map, which alarms about the problem of the CO2 or climate change, or some problem in the Indonesia now, if you have, please make it realize in the diagram. It's a mostly important things, more than make some new products. Okay, I invent a new mask. This mask is very, very good. It's a one way, of course, but mostly important is how it's dangerous, the coronavirus effect to the people. Then you can make a new diagram. The people can learn from you, right? It's the right way, I think. That's why the government seems like, I think, they don't have eye, I think sometimes. I hate so much, even though Japanese government, sometimes I really hate. Because they only concerned about divide the tax to spread to the people, right? It's okay. It's up to them, of course, but sometimes we should give the good advice to the government if you have kind of the position, right? That's why please think about we are the standing in the deadline for the people to take care of their life, right? Very, very important position we say now. That's all I want to say.
Okay, thank you, Bando Sensei. So
wait, and one more thing, in the presentation by Dr. Urmila, I really impressed about the one picture, which is shows the footprint of the jogging people making the small line on the roads. It's a footprint of the life. And when she found and take a picture and show to the people, it's design. It's also to show the people how the life is very important. The line, when we see the line, we smile. Wow, many people running here to enjoy, even though the COVID-19 days, right? This line shows the happy line we can introduce. It's a design for me. Very, very important. More than hundreds of the beautiful posters, more than the another products which are sold very well. That's all okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bando Sensei. So you like to add, Dr. Lyra and Dr. Urmila Mohan?
I think Dr. Urmila firstly,
okay,
because I agree wholeheartedly at when Bando Sensei mentioned about the lines. No, it was really impressive for me as well.
I think that both of you have inspired me to think about lines. Of course, you know, Ingold has written about lines. Graham Wee has written about lines. So anthropologically, lines is something that is very, very fertile for following. But Professor Bando, I also want to think about two things about that aspect of that photograph. First of all, I think that maybe the problem, of course, that there are multiple things in the question you asked. Why is it that designers cannot come together, right? I see it as a political problem, a pedagogical, educational, and definitely also as an economic problem. And I'm also thinking about Pandu's question about government policy and the kind of freezing effect it can have on innovation, the freezing effect it can have on life in these villages, including the ones that, you know, you've showed us in Sabrang village, and the ways that, you know, Pandu and Lyra are trying to, you know, work with the villagers, and of course, many other people who are involved there, and trying to kind of show the viability of a different kind of ecosystem, that listen, a different way of living is possible. What is interesting also is that for these projects to continue, it ends up getting framed as a heritage, right? And culture. And these terms, as much as Professor Bando pointed out, the word design itself gets reused and abused. The word culture also gets abused and exploited. So I think the commonality between all our complaints, if you want to call it, is we're talking about the excessive, rampant capitalism and the commodification of everything. So when you talk about the runners who have made that path in the land, we are celebrating it, not just as something whimsical, but we're saying it's a resistance, right? It's a resistance to this notion that everything can be commodified, that everything that is of value in life can be commodified. And if we start from the position of resistance, then we have to start looking for examples of designers who work in that resistance mode, right? So I'm wondering if what we're also talking about is we need to kind of start focusing on producing that kind of literature, that kind of design thinking, that kind of design philosophy where we consciously get more active politically. And I know the word politics scares a lot of people, but in terms of the philosophy of what design is about, and of course also ultimately makes its way into what we teach our students.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Urmila. And would you like to add, Dr. Lyra, about this topic?
I think if Urmila was talking about resistance as well, I would really want to say that Design Culture Lab has been a part of resistance. I think even from back then, I think what Bando Sensei has explored, has researched about is also a part of resistance. We are trying to resist something that is normalized to us, right? The concept of design is being normalized in a way. Of course, the concept of design we first came to know because of the Western world, right? But then I actually envy the Japanese who could come to indigenize the word of design itself. And in indigenizing this term, right, they try to somehow not just resist, but they are trying to push their concept of design, right? In our culture, this is design, but I don't think people are realizing that yet. I mean, people are not aware of that because a lot of things are being normalized to us. And I think here is Andy Sensei has raised his hand. I'm sure he has some very much interesting thing to say, please.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Okay. Okay, Dr. Anis Setiawan,
All right.
would you like to add the answer?
Thank you very much for the time. It's a very amazing conversation we have today, Bando Sensei and Dr. Urmila. Yeah, I just want to re-stress what Bando Sensei say about the pressure from the government in our institution, especially in particular in Indonesia, that now focusing in economic growth. So every aspect in Indonesia, not only in education, but all over the aspect in culture, in how we live, how we in daily life is focusing or to follow the economic growth. And I think I also agree that as designer, especially in education, as an academic, we have to come together to show there is alternative way to design. It's not always to follow the market. However, the situation is not easy because the university has to follow the government concept too.
That's right.
Yeah, so the dean, they have to follow the what the government say, and it's reflect to the how we teach the student. So we can imagine in the future the student is, we produce the designer that always to design. So I'm interested with the Bando say that we have to stop to design, but it's quite difficult to do here because the university, the School of Design is always encourage the student to design, making the new product that what like what Urmila said, that it can put to the market and to get money. So what we have to do, what we've been done today, we not only work with designer, but we also work with others discipline academia. So we collaborate with sociology, anthropology, political studies, how to get better position, how to show to the university and also the government alternative way to teach the student. And if we realize the situation in Indonesia right now is very terrible because, for example, a lot of law that produced by the government is always come to the economic growth. How we see that, for example, the deforestation in Borneo, in Sumatra, yeah, they cut all the forests to become a palm plantation. It's very terrible. How we lost our forests in the past, in the 10 years past, is very quick. And also the problem with the climate change, how the Jakarta is the most fastest sinking city in the world. And the government is not, I don't know, they realize or not. That's all our problem. And also the most important thing, this problem with the freedom of speech that today is quite difficult to do and more getting worse. When we speak something that not comfortable with the government policy, yeah, it's dangerous for us. So the problem is so complex, but we believe that with solidarity, we come together, not only with the government designer, but with the multidisciplinary academia, we still have a chance, I think.
Still have hopes, I think.
Yeah, that's what I said. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think, yeah, resistance is the right word. Underground resistance.
But you know, Andy-san, don't misunderstand. I never said complain to the government, complain to the policy, right? We should do the right things, making the diagram to show to the usual people what is wrong. We can teach the usual people by designing, right? And other people, if they insist, they can change the version, I think. But it takes time, but never give up. Of course, I told you, right, our power is very weak. That's why we have nothing to do. But before, you know, in my experiences, in a younger age, almost 20 years ago, I contribute to the citizens' resistance to the local government to stop to making dam on the river. At that time, we felt very weak. But finally, I found I make many posters, many pamphlets, and many easy manual to understand the problem and to spread to all the houses. Actually, I was a famous designer, contribute to the government work. That's why I lost every work from them because I against to them. But I have a feeling I'm right. I do the right things. Then, I make the design for the people, same like I contribute to the government work. The government gave me the big budget to make design, but I make the same design for the citizens for free. And after 4 years, the project of the dam stopped because of the citizens' referendum. It was become the big news in Japan. 2001, 20 years ago. It was the nice chance for me to change my thinking. What I mean is we have lots of the things we can do it and don't give up. Every time we complain, no government contribute to the economy, they care about the economic growing or they care about the tax, but it's better to move on. We should act in the right way. And it means, we should be clever than politician. We should have a wise thinking. And the wise thinking lives in the vernacular life, the intuition of the usual people. They have more wise thinking more than the politician, I think. That's why we should make it realize that how the wisdom is more and more, I think. And so please never give up to educate the design to the students, right?
Okay, thank you, Bando Sensei.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for all speakers and for all the audience. Finally, we come to the last session of this webinar. Okay.
Oh, by the way, before I forget, Bando Sensei, would you share with us the video or the PDF of your presentation, because the
yeah, of course, yes,
very,
yes.
very
I will send you. Okay.
Well, thank you very much. And also for Dr. Urmila Mohan, can I share the PDF to the people? Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Finally, I will share to all audience about all this webinar. We got to learning a lot, and we know we live in an era of higher expectation, easy access of information, and the important things is how we as designer act toward the situation. And this is important to learn about holistic, integrated, not only from the object, but also encouraging sustainable livelihoods for, in around us. And I think this is the final webinar today. Thank you, Bando Sensei, Dr. Urmila, Dr. Lyra, and all audience. Maybe we will take the photo session before we closing this webinar. Okay. For the all audience, please open your camera video.
Dad.
Okay, there is 3 slides. Okay, for all audience, please open your camera. Okay. At first, I will take picture on the first slide. 1, 2, 3. And the second slide. 1, 2, 3. And the third slide. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Okay, thank you very much for all audience and for all speaker. This is amazing Design Culture Talk series, and this is the first design talk that we learn a lot from this session. And thank you very much attending for the first design talk series, and hopefully we will see you next time. And thank you for listening. Terima kasih atas perhatiannya. Matur nuwun sampun niteni. Thank you for all.
Terima kasih. Thank you
Okay,
very
terima
much,
kasih.
Bando Sensei.
Okay,
Thank you very
thank
much,
you very
Dr.
much.
Urmila.
Arigato, thank you very much.
Dr.
Okay.
Arigatou gozaimasu.
Okay.
Please keep in touch.
Bando Sensei.
Bye-bye.
See
See
you.
you soon.
Thank
See
you.
you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye, mata ne.